Good evening and welcome to Monsters Among Us, the Tuesday edition. I am your guide, Derek Hayes. It is a real pleasure running into you outside of our usual Thursday hangout. Maybe we should meet here more often, because I have a whole heap of horror stories to share with you this evening. But first, remember these Tuesday shows are a little bit different. Instead of running the gambit of paranormal subjects, on Tuesdays we instead focus solely on one subject, one topic, one protagonist. And tonight is no different. But good luck pinning this subject down. The phenomena goes by many names. Shadow figures, shadow entities, black masses, the Hat Man, Shadow Man, or just plain old shadow people. Regardless of what you want to call them, it's a phenomenon that's been occurring across geographical and cultural boundaries for the better part of a quarter century. And regardless of how you name it, it's the subject matter for tonight's Tuesday episode. Now I have nearly a dozen first or second-hand accounts made by those that have claimed to have encountered these sinister, silhouetted strangers. So grab a seat in a well-lit area, and let's get after it. The All Shadow People episode. And to kick us off this evening, we begin with what I might call a classic Shadow Man experience. Please welcome Abby from Arizona.
Hi, my name is Abby from Flagstaff, Arizona, and the story I'm about to tell happened in this home. So in my previous story, I kind of described that we had a ghost named Fred who would do all sorts of things over the course of a couple of years, and his energy was pretty neutral. He wasn't good nor bad, but the story I'm about to tell is actually a Hat Man story, and I actually did not know that this was an experience that people had up until I started listening to your show in the last couple of months. So essentially, I was going to bed, and, we had a pretty set bedtime. It was like 8 o'clock. The entire house was shut off, and it was really dark. Again, we lived in this haunted house, so, we were a bunch of spooky heads. We loved watching Ghost Adventures and Tap and, creepy shows and all of the things, and it never really affected me, so I don't think that this experience was out of, fear or a nightmare or anything like that. But anyway, so I'm going to bed, and I'm laying down, and again, my room is pitch dark. I wasn't a kid that really needed a nightlight or anything like that. And I'm closing my eyes, and I hear a voice in my room telling me that everything will be fine. And now, nothing had happened in my life, right? Like, up until this point. There was nothing that had happened in my day or in my life at this point that I would need somebody to tell me that things are okay. But regardless, the entity said, everything will be okay. And I turn my head, and in the corner of my pitch dark room, I see a figure standing there, and I could distinguish it from the shadow of the night. Like, yes, my room was pitch black, but your eyes adjust and you can tell if somebody's in your room. And there's a figure standing there with red eyes and a top hat on. And I did not get a bad energy from this being. At this point, yes, I was terrified. There's somebody in my room. I'm 8 years old. Like, what is going on? And I'm scared, but the actual entity wasn't scary to me. It was the idea of somebody being in my room. And so I closed my eyes real shut. I was frozen in my bed. And it continued to tell me throughout the night, everything's going to be okay. Everything's going to be okay. I refused to open my eyes. But that image is burned into my head to this day, more than 2 decades later, of this being in the corner of my room with red, beady, piercing eyes and a hat. I woke up the next morning and I had not moved the entire night. I crawled out of my bed and my comforter was still in the shape of my body, as if I was still laying on my back. My toes pointed upward, my hands straight at my sides. I was frozen, and I've never had sleep paralysis. That wasn't sleep paralysis at all. I was simply afraid, and, my kid brain was like, if I don't move, it'll stop talking to me. But it was a super weird, unique experience. Again, I've never had sleep paralysis. I don't really have nightmares. Spooky stuff doesn't really scare me like that. And that being did not have a bad energy to it. So yeah, I don't know if you have any insight. I'd love to hear what you guys think. Thanks. Bye.
Thank you, Abby. Now, this entity, the Shadow Man, is often described as being tall, slim, masculine for the most part, sometimes wearing some sort of trench coat. And sometimes, like here in Abby's call, the figure is said to don a hat, usually a fedora, top hat, or some other flat brim style. And sometimes, again like here in Abby's story, the entity is said to possess piercing red eyes. Absolutely nightmare-inducing. But it gets even spookier when you hear some of these details. Like the one, again mentioned in Abby's call, that whatever this thing is or was, it was able to communicate with its, dare I say, victim. And believe it or not, this is not the only example of that sort of behavior that I'll be sharing on this evening's episode. When we come back, you'll hear how communications with these things could just save your life. But first, a quick word from tonight's sponsors.
It's a bigger issue internally than just... I said yesterday on the show. Record, and then you get to... They're fantastic. It just turns out defensively they stink. Because we cannot...
No, I wasn't kidding. One of these shadow people just might have saved a life. Virginia's cousin's life, to be exact. Here is her tale from the state of Georgia.
Hi, Derek. It's Virginia calling from Georgia. I have a story that actually happened to my cousin. She's my dad's first cousin, so this was a few decades ago when this story took place. And she was a child when this happened to her. To set the scene, my family has this almost 200-year-old family reunion tradition where we camp in old cabins out in the middle of the country, and we have like our own family cemetery and what have you. It's a long story how my ancestors settled that spot with the church and everything on that piece of land. Anyway, in our cabin, we have a 2-story cabin. It's all open air. Well, it used to be all open air. It's not now. A lot of it's closed in. But there are 4 rooms downstairs and an open dining room and kitchen with a porch. Upstairs also had 4 bedrooms in a tight, dark hallway. All the rooms were open air at the time, as I said, and they aren't anymore. And one night when my cousin was a child, she was sleeping in a room with her sister and my aunt. Our camp sleeps dormitory style to save space. She got up to use the bathroom in the middle of the night. We have a shower house about 50 yards away, like outhouse with toilets and showers. She got up to use the bathroom and went out into the hallway as if she was going to head out to that shower house. She stopped because she saw a figure of a man sitting on the floor in the hallway, like his back propped up against the wall and his feet out in the hallway. I don't recall her saying she saw any features necessarily on the man. She didn't know him from what she could see, but she stopped and looked at it, and the shadow man had told her, "Go back to bed, it's not safe downstairs." Now, my cousin, I don't believe she felt threatened in any way, but she heard the warning and she did exactly what the figure said, and she went back to bed. Now, the next morning, she came downstairs and her dad had just killed a snake that was hiding under the stairs. Now, as I said, the cabin was open air at the time, so the bottom level at that time was just dirt, and then it had the stairs going up to the top floor. So it was very easy for snakes to hide. So to this day, she believes it was a ghost spirit of an ancestor buried up in our family cemetery up the hill, or whatever. She had many other experiences with spirits and supernatural ways or whatever, but I too have seen shadow people as a child. I believe I saw the Hat Man as a kid, but I think that was just residual effects of trauma or stress. I don't really recall much of it. I just remember seeing a hat figure, kind of like with a trench coat and a wide brim hat, but looked big like Hagrid from Harry Potter, but obviously dark. You couldn't see features, but you could tell there was big boots, trench coat, and a hat. I would always just see it in like peripheral or in my dreams and stuff like that too, but just the house I lived in as a child just had overall bad energy and stuff would just happen all the time. But yeah, I just thought I would share that story with you. It's kind of heartwarming to know that something was looking out for her when she went to go to the shower house by herself. So I always thought that was interesting. But anyway, just wanted to share. I'm a new listener, so I love the podcast. Thanks for providing a platform for people to share their experiences. Anyway, thanks. Bye.
Thanks, Virginia. Well, there you go. A life-saving shadow entity. Who knows what would have happened if the cousin would have walked down those steps? If the snake was venomous, it could have easily ended badly. But luckily for all parties involved, except for the snake, it didn't go down that way. So thank you again, Virginia, for calling in. It's certainly not your typical Shadow Man experience. Now, if you have any paranormal experiences you would like to share here on the program, give our hotline a call at 888-608-NIGHT. That's 888-608-NIGHT. Or shoot us an email with a voice file to monstersamonguspodcast@gmail.com. Now, I couldn't help but think this next entry also fit well with the previous two. Not so much in what happens in the story, but more so how the activity is explained later on. Don't worry, I think you'll find the connection. Please welcome Anonymous, out of my state of California.
So, my story comes from when, I have a few of them actually, if you want to know the truth. For some reason, our family's been kind of like a magnet to, unexplained activities. And the first one started when I was like 5 or 6. My parents, they used to argue a lot, and as a child you try to find a place of comfort when they're fighting and everything. And I had a best friend that lived next door to me. She was the same age as me. Our parents were real good friends. They knew each other real good, and being neighbors and everything. And this happened in California, the Central Valley. I would give my name, but I don't want to sound too crazy to people around here since they're in a small town. They know everybody. My mom and dad were arguing, and I slipped out my window, which was literally next to the next door neighbor's house. So I jumped out and ran to their front porch, knocked on the door, and the dad let me in. I ran upstairs, and that's where we always played, me and the girl. And I was sad, had a lot of emotions going through me at the time, being that my parents are always fighting, and they can never see eye to eye and stuff. So I go over there, and she, we're playing. Like, kids do, you forget about it at first. Your mind just drifts off onto the playtime, and you're playing and playing, and I don't know why, I just got this real bad feeling in my stomach. Like, I just stopped playing, and I asked her for some water, so she went downstairs to get water. And I remember standing up, and she had a window that looked directly into her backyard. I could see my backyard to the right, and the other neighbor's backyard to the left. And she was in a 2-story house. We were upstairs playing. And I look out, and I don't see nothing at first. Mind you, it's probably about the middle of the day. It's Saturday. She went downstairs to get the water, and as I'm by myself up there, I stand up, and I look out her window. And in the backyard, there was a figure standing by her back shed. Wherever the shadow from the shed was, he was standing in it. And I couldn't see a face. He was just wearing a long black trench coat with a fedora, just looking down at the ground. And I remember just getting chills down my spine. And then the figure seemed to look up. Like I said, I couldn't see his face. He didn't have a face. He was just like a black shadow. And it looked like he looked up at me. And then I blinked. I turned away. And then I looked back and he's gone. I went home and I told my grandma. She lived in the alley behind us, 2 houses down. So I go home, I walk out the backyard, and I go into the alley, I walk to her house, and my grandma always was real close to me. I always believed what I had to say. And I told her what I saw, and she said that the guy in the black fedora and the long trench coat was a guardian angel. Don't know how true that is, you know what I mean? And that he was there to watch over me. Yeah, I mean, that's pretty much the story. I don't know how to explain it. Never seen him again. But yeah, that's my story. Thanks.
Thank you, caller. Now, don't get me wrong here. I'm certainly not calling your granny a liar. For all I know, she could be dead on. But in my humble opinion, these things seem to be more than guardian angels. More complex, more involved, and much more mysterious. But that said, I don't have a clue what else they would be, or where else they might have come from. But still, we thank you, caller, for the story, and for your grandmother's knowledge.
Physiological marker of somebody.
Why it escalated to people throwing a bunch of...
It inspires joy.
Bush's presidency at all.
All's really good team. They have an...
Now, sure, some of these shadow entities may or may not have aided in helping someone in a difficult situation. But don't go getting a false sense of security that every shadow entity encounter is similar to those of Abby's Virginia's and our latest caller. Some are downright terrifying. And if you don't believe me, take Andrea's word for it. Again, out of California.
Hi, Derek. This is Andrea calling from California. I wanted to share a story that happened Christmas time in the height of the pandemic. So this was Christmas time 2021, I believe. So the backstory is my husband actually had COVID and was quarantined in our bedroom, and I had been sleeping on the couch. And I was going to visit my family. Of course, I felt bad for him, but I was eager to get out of the house. I'd go visit my family for Christmas. And they lived in a little town outside of Sacramento. So Christmas Eve, I drive down to Sacramento and see my family for a little bit. And I decided to book a hotel, one, because I didn't want to just sleep on another couch at my parents' house. And two, I wanted to be mindful of social distancing at the time. So I spend some time with them and I go into the hotel, and you know, there isn't any nice hotel in this area. It's just what's available. So I go to this hotel, the standard hotel, and when I get there, things are a little weird. Like the front desk, the people there are a little tipsy. One of the guests is kind of hanging out at the front desk. He's visibly drunk as well. You know, and I'm just tired. I have, you know, driven. I've spent time with my family, and I have been dying to sleep in an actual bed. So I'm just trying to get into my hotel room, hang out for a little bit, and go to sleep. And anyway, so I go to find my room after checking in. The guy one of the guests who was at the front desk kind of follows me, and I have to spend time like getting him off my tail by pretending to go to another location. So I'm even more, by the time I get rid of this guy and get into my hotel room, I'm like even more ready to just go to sleep in a bed and chill out. And as soon as I open the door to this hotel room, as soon as the door is open, I immediately feel this very oppressive sensation. And like the room is just full of this presence. And I mean, it hit me so hard and so immediately that I was still standing with the door open with my hand on my roller luggage handle, and
I just feel this wave of like sickness to my stomach, this oppressive feeling, and I had barely crossed the threshold. But, you know, with all that context of just wanting to go to bed and kind of being a little bit harassed on my way to getting to the room, and you know, it's COVID and all of this, I just kind of chalked it up to, okay, I am stressed out and I'm really tired. I'm sure that this is just, you know, pent up feelings. You know, I'm trying to justify it. I have had moments of experiencing the paranormal throughout my life, you know, so I had a sense that I was indeed justifying it. But again, I was so tired, I just wanted to go to bed, so I kind of wrote it off. So I go into the room having, you know, made justifications to try to just prompt myself to go in, despite feeling this really sort of oppressive, frankly scary feeling. Go into the room, I turn on a movie, you know, just to have the TV going. I'm not a big like TV person, but my plan was just to kind of like watch something Christmassy, because again, it was Christmas Eve, and eat some snacks and finally sleep in a bed for the first time in, you know, a while. And anyway, so I turn on the Grinch movie, Jim Carrey, and I'm trying to like, I turn on all the lights and trying to sort of lighten the mood, but I feel this just constant and overwhelming oppressive feeling. And I am really starting to get like this sickness in my stomach of just being like, how can I ignore this? Like, clearly something is awry. But again, I just want to go to sleep, so I force myself to watch this movie and try to foster like a Christmas spirit. You know, I really actually love this holiday, so trying to get into that vibe. And, you know, enough time goes by, the movie ends, I realize that I need to try to sleep. If I'm going to, it needs to be now. So I turn down the lamp as low as it will go without being turned off completely, and I turn off the TV, and I snuggle into this nice big king-size bed. And I mean, as soon as I close my eyes, not even a second had gone by, and this suppressive feeling, suddenly it felt as if it was right in front of me. And sure enough, I open my eyes and I can kind of see this like vague outline of this dark shadow. And it is the feeling that I have had since going into the room, just magnified by like 100 times. And I am scared, really scared. And this thing just, it's at the edge of the bed next to me, you know, kind of like looming over the bed. And then it does this thing where it starts like popping in and out of existence, like poof, like poof, it will be, you know, at one end of the bed, and then poof, it'll be next to me, and then poof, it'll be on my left side, and poof, on my right side. Never getting over the bed, but like right on the outskirts of the bed. And I mean, at this point, I'm panicking, and I just start praying, and I start praying loudly and vocally, like, God, protect me. You know, I do believe in God, but I wouldn't say I'm like strictly religious, but oh boy, was I in that moment. You know, and I'm praying for protection. And then, you know, all of this kind of came to a head with me just being really pissed off because my husband's sick of COVID. I've been sleeping on a couch. It's Christmas time, and it's COVID, and just the stress of all of this. I just finally, you know, and I'm obviously terrified, and this entity is like harassing me. I finally got pissed off, and I just yelled at it. I said, you can't touch me. You can't hurt me. This is my hotel room. I'm sleeping here. You will leave me alone. And I'm just shouting at it, just as upset as I have ever been. And amazingly, this entity, I guess, it's like I had pushed it. It goes poof to the opposite end of the room where I had initially felt like the source of this presence, and it stays there, and it doesn't go away, but it doesn't come any closer. And that oppressive feeling, that heaviness, it actually laid, even though I could kind of still see the outline of this thing. I somehow managed to go to sleep. I must have been exhausted. Managed to go to sleep, saw my family for Christmas the next day, and the rest is just the story. So yeah, the final thing I wanted to say was just that I'll never not be surprised at how me getting really upset and yelling at this entity, I guess, spirit, like actually was effective in getting it to leave me alone. It didn't go away, but it left me alone. You know, I recall that like the whole night up until that moment, it had felt like, I don't know if you were bullied as a kid, but I sure was. And it had felt like that feeling I used to get when I was a kid, when I knew that the bullies were like planning to do something and they were just kind of in the corner, you know, like planning to mess with me. And sure enough, they did. It was kind of that feeling. The whole night I felt like this just creeping, encroaching feeling of like, this thing is going to mess with me, you know, and sure enough. But I'll never not be surprised that it actually was effective in getting it to leave me alone. So that is my story, and thank you for letting me share it. And I just want to thank you and Sarah and Delaney for putting this production together. It means so much to so many, as you know, and I just, you know, want to add my gratitude to the list there. So thank you, and take care. Keep it spooky.
Thank you, Andrea. Now, as if hotel rooms weren't uncomfortable enough, we now have this unsettling entry. And we already know these shadow entities are reported all over, by every walk of life, in nearly every culture. But how are they perceived by those different groups of people, you might be wondering? Because I was curious about this myself, so I asked Delaney to dig up some info about shadow people around the world. And this is what she uncovered. In Japan, the creature is called Anira, a monster composed of smoke and darkness that lives in bonfires and emerges in human form. In Inuit culture, they call it Turisk, which is a humanoid creature associated with shadows. The Turisk are identical to humans in every way, except they are not visible by looking straight at them. If you do, they simply disappear. And they call them shades in Greece, which basically describes a spirit or ghost of a dead person that dwells within the shadowy realms of the underworld. And in Gaelic, it's called the Bodach Glas, or the Old Grey Man. The Bodach Glas is a shadow figure, trickster, and omen of death, there in Gaelic folklore. So don't go thinking you can just hop a plane to get away from these sinister shadows. Whatever these things are, they seem to have gone international. And although this next entry isn't from some far-off corner of the world, it is a perfect example of one of these black mass encounters. Please welcome Ben from Indiana to tonight's show.
Hey Derek, this is Ben. I live in Indianapolis, but the story takes place in Savannah, Georgia. To be honest with you, I'm not exactly sure what I saw. I'm pretty sure it was a shadow person, but, you know, I mean, all speculation. Basically what happened was I used to live in a studio apartment in my early 20s, and I used to share a studio apartment with one of my buddies, and just so happened, one day we had the same day off. So I'll never forget it. We were watching New Girl, and the way that the studio apartment was set up, you had the TV next to the bathroom door. Well, something else happened, you know, two guys living in a studio. I'm not exactly sure what happened to the doorknob, but the doorknob wasn't there, and all there was a door port. And you could see clearly into the bathroom through the door port. But one day we were watching TV, and out the corner of my eye, I spotted just a little change blip in color change, and I looked up, and I saw just blackness, darkness, black, go past the door port. Well, this went on for about 30 to 45 minutes before I kind of was like, okay, there's actually something there. It's not just my eyes playing tricks on me. I started looking at it. I mean, it was just the deepest black you could possibly imagine, like just darkness in essence. But if you looked underneath the door, the light was unaltered. That's what messes me up about the whole situation. Like maybe it could have been a shower curtain, it could have been a towel in my head. But anyway, finally, I looked at my buddy. I said, hey, man, do you see that? And he goes, man, I thought I was going crazy. Yes. I was like, we should probably check on that, right? And he was like, I mean, yeah. So we opened the door, and nothing there. We tried to recreate it with the shower curtain, the towel rack, everything else. No dice. It was unrecreatable. The pitch of darkness that blackness was, we couldn't make anything else like imitate that. So I don't know what it was. I imagine it was a shadow person, but, who knows. Derek, love the show. Appreciate you, man. Yeah, I have a couple other stories I might call in. But, yeah, look forward to hearing myself on the show.
Thank you, Ben. The degree of darkness. That's a detail that is often brought up in these shadow men calls. The witness claiming that nothing around is as dark as the figure, despite the encounter taking place in a completely darkened room. It's almost like those super black shades of paint that they keep coming out with. Black 2.0 or 3.0, whatever their latest color is. A black so dark that it literally looks fake. Now, I threw a few examples of this super dark paint up in the show notes. Head on over to monstersamonguspodcast.com and click the show notes tab to take a look. But the point being here is that these things seem to absorb the light rather than reflect it. And I don't know exactly what that means, but I know it's a detail that's creepier than all hell. And Ben's experience won't be the last to feature that detail here tonight. In fact, there may be many details that seem to be repeated over and over, if you listen close enough. Now I have several more calls to share with you on the other side of this break, so don't go anywhere.
You can pick up the phone and call them. I don't think it makes much of a difference.
With this disgusting demonic response.
And I said, listen, the windows in here.
Now, oftentimes these shadow entities are described as being silent. But that's not always the case. If you're anything like Jen here in New York, you can, at the very least, hear these things coming.
Hi, Derek. This is Jen from Long Island. Long-time listener, long-time fan. You do a phenomenal job. I have a Hat Man story for you. It happened about 15 years ago. It was during a very tumultuous time in my life. And at the time, I was living in a house that had a master bedroom that was a loft. And there were wooden steps leading to the master bedroom, open floor plan, so there was no door, just these wooden steps. Bam, you're in the master bedroom. There's a queen-size bed, and there is a TV on a TV stand at the foot of the bed. I have to sleep with the TV on all night. I just need that background noise. Anyway, like I said, horrible point of my life, very low point of my life. And I think it was like about between 2 and 3 in the morning. I had woken up to the sounds of the slow plodding footsteps coming up the wooden steps into the bedroom. I was also overcome with sleep paralysis, so I could not move, and the only thing I could do was have this labored breathing because I was so terrified of what was slowly making its way up into the bedroom. And I could not move. I had been prone to sleep paralysis before. Does not happen consistently. Maybe I'm going to be 50 November. I'm going to say maybe 10 times my entire life it's happened. In any event, I'm hearing these footsteps. I'm hearing them, and that and I can't move. I can't scream. I can't do anything. And then I look at the TV in front of me at the foot of the bed, and silhouetted is a black silhouette man with a hat. And the hat, it always reminded me of the scary creature in the second Poltergeist movie. If you're aware of that, he wears this brim black hat. In any event, that's it always reminded me of that. I'm looking at this figure and it's just staring, and it's just silhouette of a man with a hat, black. I see no features, nothing. lights are out in the bedroom, and his silhouette is illuminated by the TV behind him. The paralysis breaks. I'm able to move. I'm able to get up. I put on the light. I am searching. There is no one there. Doors are locked, blah, blah, blah. And I am completely freaked out and scared. Time goes by, years perhaps, and I am now in a different point of my life, and I happen to be researching, I don't know, some kind of supernatural blog or talk. I was reading something, and something came up, and it said something about man in a black hat or man in a hat sighting, and I stopped breathing. Thinking back, this happened years ago, this realization that this kind of vision has happened and happens to people. And it generally happens when people are in low points of their life and they're very vulnerable, they're struggling with addiction or whatever. That this figure, this thing, entity will present. And I just remember my blood turned cold. That's exactly what it did. And I can just immediately think back to sitting there, and I remember that feeling like, oh my goodness, this is like a thing. This is a thing that people report happening. And when it happened, now remember, there was a lag of many years in between of when it happened to me and when I learned that this was something that was reported. So I had no idea. So when that happened to me all those years ago, I would convince myself that this was just a sleep paralysis, a bad dream, a nightmare, blah, blah, blah. I had things going on in my life, and this is why this happened. And I really tried to justify it to the point of me no longer even entertaining the idea of it being something that could be real, that this could be a real negative energy or negative entity or demon or what have you, that this is something real. Because when it happened, it was real to me. And I can hear every step on the stairs. I can see that silhouette perfectly in my mind's eye of that black entity with the hat illuminated with the TV behind him. It was so real, and it felt like it lasted for such a long time, and I couldn't move. I felt like it was a harbinger of death. That's how I took it at the time when it first happened. It was a harbinger of, you're either going to continue on this path and it's going to be negative, or you need to turn it around. You need to turn it around right now. And by the grace of God, I turned it around, and I'm, in a different spot in my life now, and different mindset, different everything. And yeah, crazy, scary. And so again, I truly had no idea when it happened that it was a thing that people reported. Very scary. And it makes sense to me that this entity would appear to you when you are at a low point in your life, because I certainly was. And I will, I'm now, 12 years sober. I don't look back ever. I keep it in the day, and it's one day at a time, and I am mindful and I'm grateful, and I handle life on life's terms. But it was really, really scary, and so I wanted to share that. I hope you're well. I hope your lovely Sarah is well. Keep working hard and keep producing this amazing podcast, and I wish you well. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks, Jen. That sounds like a terrifying experience. But I'll be honest, it also sounds like it could be sleep paralysis as well. Of course, I know I wasn't there, and only Jen knows what really happened. But some of the telltale signs are present. Now, of course, that doesn't make it any less terrifying. And that doesn't take away from our appreciation of Jen for taking the time to share her call. Now, folks, real quick, don't forget about our merchandise shop if you're into supporting the show and getting a little something back in return. A little item from our shop will surely fit your needs. Just visit us at monstersamonguspodcast.com and click the shop tab. Not only are these unique items fun to get your hands on, doing so goes a long way to support the show. So again, monstersamonguspodcast.com and click that shop tab. Now next up, we venture to Connecticut, where Andy is waiting with a story.
Hello, Derek. This is Andy calling from Hartford, Connecticut. I just want to say that Monsters Among Us is the best podcast there is out there. It's just fantastic. I love the show. I had something strange that recently just happened. So I've been practicing yoga for about a year now, and, at the end of the class, we're all sitting cross-legged in a little bit of a meditative state. And so I was looking, there's a mirror in front of us. And so I was looking in the mirror, and there were 8 of us in class, but there were actually 9 images in the mirror. So there was an image shaped like a person that looked like a shadow. It was sitting in the same position as us. That's all I could make out. It had no real features, but it just was like the outline of a person sitting, and it looked like a shadow. And I kind of closed my eyes, reopened them to make sure. Then I was just kind of looking up at the lighting, and there was no way. I mean, this was clearly in the mirror. So this is actually the second time this has happened to me in class, where there's more images than there are actually students in the class. I was just thinking this could be a shadow person. That's the only thing I could think of. So this last time it happened, I didn't say anything to anyone. I'm like, they're going to think I'm crazy. The first time it happened, I did say something to the instructor. She was trained in India, studied yoga there, so she said it could be a jinn. So she kind of gave it a description. She's like, in the Western culture, we may consider it a demon, but she said it's not that malicious. She said it's a little bit more mischievous, kind of along the lines of like a leprechaun. She said they just kind of like messing with people, but they're not really dangerous. So I'm not sure I know what is what anymore, but I just wanted to share that with you guys, and I'm just curious if anyone else has experienced this. Okay, keep up the great work, Derek. Love the podcast. Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. Oddly enough, this isn't the only story I have to share this evening that features one of these shadow entities projecting itself in a reflective surface. Of course, we have Andy here with his yoga mirrors. And we have Joel, who saw it in... Well, you know what? I'll just let him tell you. Please welcome Joel from Illinois.
Hey, Derek. My name's Joel. I've been meaning to call in with this story for a while and just had never gotten around to it. And I was talking to a friend about it recently, and it kind of spooked me again, and so I thought I would call and tell you about it. So I'm from Alton, Illinois, which is one of the most haunted cities in America, and this story actually takes place about 30 minutes south of that in Maryville, Illinois. I used to work at a church. This would have been back around 2012-ish. 2013. I was part-time. I would just kind of work, a few hours. I helped out with their music stuff, and so I would do sound and lighting stuff. My wife and my kids were out of town in Kentucky, and I decided that while they were out of town that I would, on a Friday night, go get some work done because there wasn't anyone at the house. And so I went over to the church, which was near our house at the time, and I was working there pretty late. It was after midnight. I was up in the balcony sitting at the soundboard working on some things, and the building just kind of started to feel odd. I wasn't really hearing noises or anything. I just felt spooked and thought, it's time to call it a night. So I packed my stuff up and I walked down the stairs, and just for some context, hopefully you guys can kind of get a visual idea from this, but when you walk down the stairs from the balcony into the main lobby and you face the doors to the exit, you're looking at the parking lot that's behind the building, and it has a set of 6 glass doors. So it's basically a wall of windows. And at night, you can see the reflection of the entire room in those windows. and there were no street lights on. Even the parking lot lights were off. And my reason for saying that is because there would have been maybe some way to explain what I saw had there been any extra light that would have cast a second shadow off of my body or something like that. But there wasn't anything like that. I'm walking towards the doors and I see a figure. It looked like a shadow, but again, it's a reflection. So, I'm not sure if there was actually someone in the room with me. Maybe someone broke into the church. I don't know. And they were waiting for me to leave, but there was no vandalism that took place and nothing that we know was stolen. So that maybe kind of rules that out. But I'm walking towards the door and I see this figure behind me. And like I said, I was already feeling pretty spooked. And so I just kind of bolt for the doors, and the doors have a panic bar in the middle. And so when you push on it and go out, the doors lock behind you. So I already had all of the other doors locked up. So I just pushed the panic door and walked out. And, I kind of turned around and looked at the building once I got to my car. And it just was so dark, darker than usual, kind of this like inky blackness that I know a lot of people kind of describe whenever they're experiencing things like a fear eater, this like ominous feeling of terror and dread. And so I was pretty concerned about that and got in the car immediately. And this is where it gets scary. My phone rings, and it's my wife, and she's in Kentucky, and we're on an hour time difference. And she says, "Are you okay?" And I said, I think so. And she said, "Well, I just had a terrible dream that something was like trying to harm you." And I was like, I am getting the hell out of here. So I basically drove home and couldn't sleep the rest of the night and was freaked out by that. And my wife was freaked out by it. And I don't really have an explanation other than it's just a good spooky story. So I don't really know. Maybe you have an opinion. Hope to hear from you.
Thank you, Joel. Now maybe there is something to all of this. Perhaps mirrors or reflective surfaces altogether have something to do with the existence of these unusual characters. But what that connection may be, I'm afraid that's above my pay grade. Or perhaps this is all just a wild coincidence, and the reflective surfaces have nothing to do with this shadowy phenomena. Either way, a big thanks to both Andy and Joel for sharing those seemingly linked submissions. Now folks, I'm going to take our last break of the evening, but when I return, I have a trio of stories that'll be sure to leave you unsettled. I'll be right back.
So Chloe, can you talk about is this right now? Do we have any idea of how many?
Now, like I promised, these next calls are quite unsettling. Beginning with this entry from Joe, out there in Kansas.
Hi, Derek. This is Joe in Kansas again. I've been binging, trying to listen to as much as I can before I share any more, because I want to see if some of my experiences match up with others that others have had. I was just listening to season 13, episode 8, and Lydia called in talking about the shadows that she used to see out of the corners of her eye. And I used to think it was just my vision or my imagination or whatever, until one day me and my best friend were sitting there talking, just chit-chatting, about who knows what. And I saw something out of the corner of my eye. I went to look at it, and at the same time I looked, he looked. And I asked him, because I noticed that he jerked his head, and I was like, "Did you just see that?" And he's like, "Yeah, but I don't know what it was." And I'm like, "Neither do I." But it's like I see these things all the time, and every time I look to see what it is or whatever, they disappear. And he's like, "The same thing happens to me." And so between the two of us, we came up with what we started calling the hiding. Because every time we'd look at them, they would hide. Where they would hide, how they would hide, not a clue. So we both just know that they were there. And like I said, if it was just me, myself, or him seeing something and looking that I didn't see, but after that first time that him and I both saw whatever it was that we saw at the same time, from that point on, we both just kind of, every once in a while, I'd jerk my head, he would too, and you know, like I said, to say, and this happened from about the time I was about 15, 16 until I was, I don't know, 22, 23. And after that, they just kind of stopped showing themselves. I don't know why. I still, to this day, have no idea what they were. Yeah, that's about it. Thanks for the show, man. And again, I'll say it, and I've heard a bunch of other people say it, you know, that what we've experienced is what we know we experienced. And, you know, some people don't believe us, and some people tell us we're crazy. And, you know, it's nice to have a place that we can go to share what we know we have experienced without any condescension, without any, oh, you're crazy or you're high or whatever. And it's nice. And I'll tell you right now that I'm one of those people that really, really appreciate you and your show. So keep up the good work, man, and have a good night. Take care. Bye.
Thank you, Joe. Now, I asked Delaney to dig up a few explanations as to where these things might be coming from. Astral travelers, time travelers, and interdimensional beings seem to be the top theories going around. But she also dug up an article that suggests that certain regions of the human brain may be responsible for essentially inventing these figures. The article comes to us via science.org, and the following is the relevant portion of the article. According to a new study, when a specific region of the brain called the left temporoparietal junction, or TPJ, which is roughly above the left ear, is stimulated, it can create the illusion of a shadow person. And the shadow person phenomena may shed light on how the brain perceives self. In order to recognize its own body, the brain uses sensory information such as visual and proprioceptive cues, which indicates the position of body parts relative to each other and everything else. Now, the TPJ is known to put some of these cues together. When this function is disrupted, the brain perceives two bodies instead of one, and mistakes the second for that of a stranger. Now, this is a little bit complicated, so of course I've linked to the entire article in the show notes, so you can go take a look. But what do you think of this hypothesis? Is it possible that it's merely our brains creating these entities? Literal figments of our imagination? Or is this hogwash? Well, if that is how these entities manifest, how do you describe Alyssa's entry out of New Hampshire?
Hi, Derek. This is Alyssa. I am calling about a story that I had briefly mentioned in another call I put in, but I love the show. I've been listening for years. It's gotten me through a lot of night shifts and just day shifts in general. I'm from southern New Hampshire, and this is a story from a haunted house I lived in for 9 years. Both accounts for me and my family. We moved in when I was about 9 years old, so around, I want to say 2012, 2011. And this is in Raymond, New Hampshire. I don't live there anymore, so. Nothing felt off for a while, but about a year in, I was exploring the woods outside of my house, as a kid does, and I found this weird circle that's made up of trees, and it's surrounded by arches, natural arches created by the tree. And I had been living in the woods my entire life, so I knew that that wasn't something that a person would have done or could have done with the way it was set up. Whether it was just vines arching over, creating a pathway into the archways, or just tree branches arching over each other in a very peculiar pattern that you don't see generally in nature. And I had noticed this, which was weird because I was 11 at the time. So not many people at 11 would notice that archways were created in the woods and that they were unnatural. So I told my parents, and they said, that's weird. But that's not what made the house haunted. I don't know if that has a connection to it, but when I was 13, I started seeing shadows in the house. At first, I chalked it up to be just, the shadow of the chair, shadow of pictures on the wall or something. I don't know. I was 13 trying to make up an excuse. But as time went on, I would look out into the living room from my bedroom. That was at the far end of the hall. I would peek out of my bedroom door to go to the bathroom, turn on the hall light, and I noticed that when I turned on the hall light, the figures that looked almost like people would disappear. I never saw them move, but I would also hear footsteps around the house, even when I was home alone, towards the age of 16, 17 years old. Now, the next event is something that I still cannot explain. This was my parents. When they had their room down in the basement, we have windows outside by the basement, and they are at ground level when you walk past the house. This was the middle of winter time in the middle of the night. They heard a knock, knock, knock on the glass. So they went and looked to see if an animal or a person was at the window. Nothing. And then another knock, knock, knock a couple hours later. And they went outside in the morning to check the snow because it was wintertime in New Hampshire. We have about 6 inches of snow at the time. There was no footprint. And to get to that window, you had to have created some sort of footprint on the snow. Other events that happened in that house were just odd feelings and feelings of dread. And sometimes I would hear someone call my name when no one called my name. Other than that, it never really disturbed us. It never harmed the family. It made itself known. The only time it harmed any part of my family is when one of my ducks went missing, completely out of nowhere. No evidence of any struggle from an animal, no evidence of it breaking out. It was just gone. And of course, that could be from something else. But I wanted to hear your opinion on if my house was haunted or not, because honestly, I think it was. That or it's just a bunch of odd occurrences that shook my family a little bit.
Thank you, Alyssa. Now, it's difficult to say if your place is haunted or not, Alyssa, because some of the phenomena you described could be dismissed as unusual, but still relatively mundane. But then you start mentioning these shadow figures, which throws a bit of a wrinkle into this whole thing. So maybe it's not that your place is haunted, Alyssa. It could be that you are, or another member of your family. And sure, the article could be correct, and the human brain may be inventing these creatures from whole cloth. But what about the knocking sounds? Did it invent those as well? Now, I'm not a scientist, so I can't sit here and poke holes in this theory. I'm simply not qualified to do that. But all that said, it's hard to think it might not be the cause. But regardless of where these things are coming from, once you've had an experience, it seems you never shake the uneasy feeling these seem to leave behind. And though the years will pass, the fear seems to be just below the surface. To give a perfect example of what I mean, and to round out this episode, please welcome Stephen to tonight's program.
Hi, Derek. This is Stephen, call from New Jersey. I've called several times. This one hits different, and I don't really know how to, get into it without really being affected. All right, so long story short, I called on an experience that I had when I was around 8 and 9 years old. So this past Friday, my son, who was 8 years old, comes in my room before we go to bed. He's like, "Hey, Dad, Mom, can I sleep in your bed tonight?" I'm like, Nah, not tonight. I'm not really trying to sleep uncomfortable. You sleep in your bed. And normally he don't really ask to sleep in our bed unless it's like we watching a movie or something like that. So whatever, he goes, him and my youngest son, they both go in their room, they go to sleep. My son wakes up, I don't even know what time it is. It's in the middle of the night. He wakes up crying. They both come in my room crying. My oldest son says, my leg hurts. Can I please sleep in here? I'm like, Steven, no, you sleeping in my bed is not going to make your leg feel any better. I'm like, just go to sleep in your bed, lay on the opposite side so you're not putting pressure on that leg, and you'll be fine. He finally goes in his room with his little brother. I get them situated. I lay back down. I don't know if it was a half an hour or an hour. It's like one of those sleeps where, an hour could have went by, but you feel like you're still up. You're still, awake, but you sleep. I don't know how to describe that, but I just hear him scream hysterically, screaming. I jump up out of my bed, run in their room, bust in their door. He's pointing at the closet, hysterically crying, shaking. And my youngest son is crying, shaking, looking over in the same direction, but he's more so frantic because his brother's screaming. I'm like, what happened? What happened? What happened? He's like, he was standing there. He was standing there. It was a man. It was a man. I'm like, what? He was 6 feet tall. He had long arms. He had a hat on. He was reaching out for me. I'm like, wait, what? And then when he's saying this to me, like, it brought me back to my experience, because one, I've never told my son about this experience that I had at a young age, and two, he doesn't even know about Hat Man, assuming because he said the thing had a hat on, and it really brought me back, and it really kind of not broke me down in a sense, but it brought me back, and it shook me up. But I had to gather myself because I need to make sure my son is good. So I'm like, are you sure that's what you're seeing? He's like, yeah. He had long arms, he had long fingers, he was just reaching out for me. And now me and my fiance, we was thinking to ourselves, like, how does he have, all these details? I started thinking, I'm like, well, his closet is right up on his bed, like it's right near his bed. So if he's seen it near his closet, it's close enough where he can get a description and point out details if he can make anything out. And I'm like, everything that he described is everything that I seen as a young kid. So I called my brother immediately. And I was like, bro, you remember what happened, us in the Bronx? And he's like, come on, man, you really talking about that again? I'm like, no. It's not that. It's Steven said he's seen the same exact thing last night. And then he just stopped. He just like, what? I was like, yeah. And I've never told Steven this story. So how did he have the same exact details of the thing that we've seen years ago? And it's just weird because, he's a junior, but he sees it around the same age that I seen it. And then when I both in my room, because at that point I'm real compassionate. I'm like, all right, just come on, I got you. And nothing's going to happen. They come in the room, and then my youngest son, he's like, Daddy, the superhero's coming. He's going to come in here. He's coming. I'm like, the superhero? I'm like, nah, don't worry, Daddy got you. And from that point on, I stood up for like an hour and a half just watching the door, making sure nothing happens. And then what's weird is my youngest child, my daughter has a push toy, and it's real sensitive. So even if you make a slight vibration on the floor, it starts going off. And then all of a sudden I hear out in the hallway, let's start walking. That's her toy. And I'm like, where it's situated, it's up in the toy chest because I don't like to have it on the floor because the dog roams around and sometimes he bumps into it at nighttime. So for that to go off after this whole thing happened, it's very weird. But I'm holding it together, but I had to get this off my chest. I finally talked to, other than telling my brother this, I finally talked to my dad. But when I was telling him about my son's situation, he was taken back a little bit. And I told my cousin, who me and him enjoy your podcast, I told him finally, and it's just crazy. I hope, y'all enjoy the story. I mean, I didn't really enjoy it, but, thinking back on it now, I could breathe a little bit easier, but yeah. So y'all stay up, everyone, be safe out there.
The superhero. There is so much that is unsettling about a creature like that. Having a nickname like the superhero. There's nothing about that I like. But I do love this story, Stephen. A second-generation monster. It certainly lends some credence to the claims that your boys had made. Now, if we can just get your father to admit to seeing it when he was a child, I think that detail would not only be a wild revelation, but would also knock a few of these theories on their heads. Now, I hope your Shadow Man visitations are a thing of the past, not only for your sake, Stephen, but for your children's as well. I just couldn't imagine being in their shoes. So thank you again, Stephen, for taking the time to call in. And please do let us know if it ever comes back. And folks, that's going to do it for this All Shadow Man episode. I can't thank you enough for swinging by here this evening. It's a real pleasure to share these episodes with you, week in and week out. Now, before I dive into the credits, I have a bit of a downer message to share, but I feel it's extremely important. My little brother took his own life 7 years ago this week. And not a minute goes by that I don't remember him. And not a minute goes by that I don't wish I would have done more to help him. So if you are in a similar situation, please get some help. Don't try to battle whatever your demons are alone. And if you're on the outside, watching your loved one hurt, I offer the same advice. Seek qualified help before it's too late. I miss you, buddy. Now, Monsters Among Us is written and produced by me, Derek Hayes. Copyright Red Crow Media. Additional support is provided by Sarah Carter Hayes and Delaney Bowers. All media used in this production is done so under the protection of fair use. Be sure to follow us on social media, give us a like and follow at YouTube, and give us a rate and review wherever that sort of thing is possible. Finally, tonight's score was provided by Iron Cthulhu Apocalypse, Co.ag Music, and Carl Casey at White Bat Audio. Now, I'd like to thank you one last time for hanging out with us here this evening, and I hope you'll all join us on Thursday for the latest regular release. And don't forget about Monsters Among Us Jr., which drops each and every Wednesday over on its own feed. Just search for Monsters Among Us Jr. spelled out wherever you find your podcast. All right, folks, that's it for this episode. Keep it spooky. And of course, have yourselves a good night.